Well, hello everybody. Good evening. Great to have you with us tonight. Tonight we're hosting another conversation as part of the Artpark Idea series. Um, Tonight with us we have Robert Booth and Diane Bertolo, hosted by Dr. Anthony Bannon. I would remind everybody this is a fundraiser. We are talking about Art Park residencies and residencies as a very meaningful program and really the base for our future growth and of course our legacy. And we're inviting our artists from the past to talk about why these residencies are so essential. And today we invite you to support future residency programs. This coming year, they will be represented by two artists, Florian Edinburgh and his installation Murmuration, which is actually donated to us, and we need funds to install it. And another installation by Omar Khan and team from UB School of Architecture called Grotto. And so many more projects to come with your support. With a minimum donation of $150, you can receive a poster by Philip Burke. And with a minimum donation of $250, you will receive a poster by Owen Morell. Actually, it's an original print from 1980, signed by Owen Morell, and a limited edition of only 31 posters. And please be in touch with us with questions, donations. Today you can participate by clicking on the button that we have at the bottom of the screen. It says Q&A, or you can also chat with us during the conversation. And without much ado, I will hand this over to Dr. Binnen.
Well, thank you, Sonia, and thank you, Diane and Robert. We're so pleased that you're with us tonight, and it's a pleasure to remember that year of 1983 when you were in residence at the park. One of the things that we'd like to do is to tie your experience to the ideas that rest behind it. To think about 1983 not only in an idea-based manner, but also, frankly, I'd love to hear a little gossip about 1983 and the fun you had or the folks you admired. Robert, I saw that the lifting of the eyebrows. Uh, the but Diane, what was it like in that year, and the people that you met, and the influences that you took on for your own work?
Well, 1983 wasn't the first time I was really at Artpark, because living in Buffalo, all of us would go up there constantly to just see what the artists were doing. So my memories are more of years prior to that, largely because when I was there, I was just sort of off in the woods working by myself. I didn't even get to see Bob's piece, and that totally surprises me, right? So my memory was, or one of my really joys was meeting Ree Morton. And I'm not sure, Sonia, I don't know if you remember what year she was in. I don't remember myself, but she's like, was my art mother is what I used to call her, because she was such an inspiration. And being in Buffalo, we would come up and see people's work often. And because I was also involved with Hall Walls, we would sometimes snag them for a visiting artist talk while they were in the area. So getting to know her was a really lovely thing. And that was one of the joys of it, was going and sort of like, it was an open studio, right? So people were outside working. It was really fantastic way to just watch the process and see what people were doing. In 1983, the thing that I thought about when we were talking earlier was that I left Buffalo to move to New York right that very year. I think maybe a month after I finished the project. But then I started thinking about what that year was. And, personal computers were just on the horizon. We didn't have any social media. It was a very different time. So I started thinking about just being in the woods and making stuff you know, that was pretty cool. It's hard to go back to just thinking like that anymore, because social media and, you know, all of our hot environment really sort of like colors all the ways we look at things. So I sort of looking back at myself as a young artist was really nice to think of it in that way, and sort of to bring, you know, how you think now and how you make now. And Artpark was really fun for that. It was a great lab. You know, it was like a place to experiment, and, you know, it was a great experience.
Ree Morton was at Artpark at least in 1976,
Was it?
because I did a film for her and Helene Valentine that summer, two artists who were using the land so profoundly, along with Mary Miss. She was there in
Mm-hmm.
'76 also. So, and weren't you a
I
ranger?
remember her piece. You know, I watched last week when she did her talk. I
Hmm.
remember going to her piece, not when she was there, it was another time. I think it was after it, or after she had left, and wanting to experience what it was like to go down into that pit.
Hmm.
And it's especially after seeing the film last week, I just sort of like remembered with like going down, and then it was actually a snake pit at the
No.
very bottom. There must have been like 16 or so snakes. I just never got to really go further.
Uh, hey, Bob,
Yes, sir.
your time there was remarkable, because I cannot get out of my mind your installation on the grassy area just off the what was called the Art L at that time, and um, I thought it was a real profound translation of your early work. I hope you'll explain that a little later. But right now, what do you recall of 1983? Did you meet? Do you remember working with Diane at that time?
Oh, Diane and I never, if we even saw each other, it was only in passing.
Huh.
You know, what I remember, I mean, there was over 20 of us there, and that was just the project artists. And then there were, I mean, the people I remember as Scott Burton was there, Biff Hendrick was there, Miho Sawada, Kit Ian Snyder, Vito Conchi. I don't. There was a bunch that were there, and the interesting thing about it is we were all very, very busy.
Mm-hmm.
We had a deadline that we had to have this stuff done by, and whatever that date was, and that was kind of the official end of it all. And some of the projects were real time consuming. So we, you know, this idea that we all hung out together and kind of, you know, had beer and snacks, it just didn't happen. We were constantly working, and it was very convenient when the park would close, because then we could work without any disruptions at all. So it was an exciting time. There's no doubt about it, but there was very little interaction that I remember. I mean, other than maybe passing a couple people in the kitchen or that past one of the kilns, and that was just the project artist. Then there was, good Lord, I don't know how many resident artists were there at that time. So it was kind of a crowd. But there was, and maybe it says more about me than it does about the rest of the group, but I don't remember having a whole heck of a lot of time to interact with anybody.
Well, you zeroed in on your work, didn't? And you're a distinguished State University of New York wide professor, receiving the highest honors that one could receive from your work at Fredonia. What do you take away anything from your experience at Artpark that has helped you as a teacher for your years?
Well, let me add, it's emeritus now. So I'm no longer teaching. But I think what Artpark did was it brought together so many dissimilar kinds of people, personalities, but mostly the style of art. and the way people approached their art and the way they thought about their art. And I know that you were talking a little bit about that with Mary Miss when she was talking about, the big isms and what happened. You had expressionism and abstract expressionism and conceptualism and environmental art, and and where did we go? And it's pluralism. That's where we are. And that's where we've been for some time now. And so how Artpark maybe shaped and influenced how I approached my students over the years, because I had a lot of years after Artpark to teach students, was probably that there is no one way, that there's a myriad of ways that you can assess your inspirations and make manifest your ideas without having to follow some sort of set dogma. And that I saw at Artpark very plainly. I mean, what I was doing and what Diane was doing and what Scott Burton was doing had some similarities in that they were sort of responsive to the place that we found ourselves. But I think the motivations were very, very different, and certainly the work was different.
Mm-hmm. Well, I bet that Diane will speak about that relationship between the land and what she found from it during that period, work that material ideas that she knew before coming to Artpark, of course, but the presence at Artpark surely must have commanded your thinking thereafter. But Diane, in that time, you more than anyone would remember the impact that hall walls brought to our continued thinking about the work, the pluralistic work that we were seeing at Artpark, and you were a part of that, part of making it happen at hall walls. And hall walls became a magnet for Artpark artists to come and spend time, say on the weekend or whatever.
On the weekend.
What happened, Diane?
What happened there? Do you mean in hall walls or
Yes,
the land?
no.
There was a multiple question. It was a pluralism question.
Thank you for making it clear. No, I meant at hall walls, the relationship between hall walls and Artpark at that time.
Oh, well, we always at hall walls were like just ready to take on anything that was available. And when Artpark was putting out great programming, great artists coming up, we were not shy about going and finding, whoever, just to hear them, see them, look at the work, bring them to hall walls, pick their brains, get all their ideas, like that kind of thing. But, it was like, in the way that Artpark was experimental and like a laboratory, hall walls was the same. So there was a synergy, and, we would go see the artists at Artpark. They would come in, get some chicken wings, see some shows, things like that. It was a lot of synergy there, because it's, you're in Buffalo. There's great things at the Albright Knox. There was great things at the Birchfield, maybe later. I'm not sure how much was going on then, but Artpark was so close. You could just, with a quick drive, see some great art and get to know different people. So that was really, educational, let's say. It was just a good synergy between the organizations.
Bob, would you care to explain? I'm hoping that your sharing of some of your work will take us through the symbols and the objects that you developed while at Artpark.
Well, yeah.
Can you share?
I can share a few things here.
Yeah, thanks.
So I was actually first at Artpark in 1981. I went as a resident artist, and I was overwhelmed by the amount of activity that was going on constantly. The park would open and there would be throngs of people streaming into that park, and they would be there all day long, and they would be sitting on park benches, and they would be traipsing up and down the L, and they'd be, you know, playing frisbees, and amongst all that, you had the artists that were producing stuff. For me, art had always been a very solo experience, or enterprise, I should say. I mean, it's like a lot of artists. I mean, you're in your studio, you're kind of by yourself. But at Artpark, it was theater. You were really literally kind of on stage. And in '83, I was invited back to do as a project artist. And the piece that I did there, I called Dancing Chairs. And the chair motif is something that I had used prior to that, but never on this scale. And what I was trying to do was, with the piece that was called Dancing Chairs, was I was trying to capture the fact that Artpark, the environment, was experiential, that it wasn't about a singularity of an event there. It was this multiplicity of things that were going on at all simultaneously for all hours of the night and day. So what I wanted to do was somehow capture in this piece, or have the piece embody this idea of flux, or this idea of desultory motion, where there was this energy and this pulsation. And so I did this piece. And I would say that the other thing in I'm having a little trouble sharing here, my slide, there we go. The other thing I would say about it is that what struck me about Artpark is so many of the pieces that were there, and I would say my own included, was there wasn't any clear defining line of where the piece stopped and the park began. And I liked that, that it sort of inhabited a space without strict confines. And, you know, so the piece had this ability to invite you into it. It was in front of you, it was behind you. It allowed you to become a participant with it as much as you were a viewer of it. And again, my deck seems to be lagging here. What I thought about it was this idea of figure ground and making art an ephemeral experience. You know what, Tony, my deck is frozen here. Let me see if I can fix this, all right? Can you, why don't you go to Diane and I can come back and see if I can't get this to work. Do you mind?
Tony, you're muted.
You're muted.
There we go. Yeah. So I'll do sign language instead. There was a question that popped up. Perhaps Sonia would take it in this interim, and it was how were the artists paid?
How were these projects and artists paid? I'm presuming this question means where did the source of funding come from, rather than how much did the artist pay. That's what I'm assuming here. Artpark was a unique organization in the history of this country entirely. It was one and only arts organization fully funded by the government, by the state government. Artpark was funded as part of New York State Parks, and its budget came direct from a line item in New York State budget. There weren't any grants, there weren't any donors. It was literally the funding of the government. At the time, Nelson Rockefeller was a big believer in cultural democracy and in art should be free and accessible. Artpark was established about a decade after Shakespeare in the Park won their case in Central Park to remain free, that big sort of case they had with Robert Moses, who was the commissioner of the parks at the time, who demanded that parks should charge for Shakespeare in the Park at the time. So all those beliefs that art should be free and accessible to everyone was the foundation of Artpark as a place for accessible arts, and not only visual arts were funded, but more also very expensively opera productions, theater productions, tours, major tours of ballet and opera companies. All of that was presented at a very large theater that we still have. It's a 4,000 capacity theater. At the time, was one of the largest in the state. Was the tallest fly house in the state of New York. It was at $3. The ticket was $3.50 to see Bolshoi, to see Toronto Ballet, to see New York City Opera, New York Philharmonic, and productions of Joe Papp's Hamlet, and Philip Glass had his premiere of Satyagraha just around
I saw that.
1980. And then the politics changed, and by the time the 90s rolled in, that approach had to change. A lot in the arts funding world has changed. NEA were also under some scrutiny, and NISCA as well. So Artpark and Company had to become an independent, self-funding, nonprofit institution, and that's when the programming had to change also to become a self-sustaining organization. Unfortunately, the residencies, artistic residencies in visual arts, were sort of the victim of that change, and that funding was not restored for, well, until now. That's what we're trying to do right now, is to reestablish that foundation, that funding foundation, and you're our audience here today are sort of at the start of it. So let's do it again. Let's do it a
Thank
different
you.
way.
Thank you very much. And Robert, I'm starting your clock.
All right. Well, let me just add to that. That I know I've gone to a lot of New York State parks, and I can remember when I moved to Western New York and I saw Artpark for the first time, and I just and then was invited there. I mean, I just couldn't believe that New York State was willing to support this kind of wonderful activity there. New York State has been very generous with a lot of their parks. I mean, they do a good job with their state parks, especially the ones around Ithaca and on the other side of the state. And the same was true with Artpark. And it's a shame that, you know, that maybe it's changed and not gotten as much playback as it used to. Okay, let me just finish up with a couple of images here. Like I said, the one thing that I really appreciated about this opportunity was, as a sculptor, you know, you're always kind of working off the pedestal. You're working with that discrete object. And to be able to work in a space where the object could blend and transcend its singularity and become an environment that you become, you know, that becomes part of your peripheral vision as well as that which is directly in front of you, was very exciting to me. And when I started, this is a close-up of the piece. They're wood, and they're not meant to last. They're on steel posts. And when I went back into the studio, I had the problem, and here we got to go again. Let me try something here. I'm very, very sorry about this. I don't understand why this is happening.
Well, we imagine the chairs in the environment, and there's one on the wall. Good.
So I just got a couple of more. I'll show you that this is. So I'm a studio artist, basically. So I came out of Artpark and I thought, how on earth am I ever going to deal with these kinds of feelings about figure ground, outside, inside, environmental kind of spaces in a studio situation? And this is what I came up with. This is the very first piece I did called Chairscape right after, and it's built directly onto the walls. So all of those round dowel buttons are painted and pinned directly to the wall, and then the chairs, of course, are floating over the surface, just like they did in Artpark. And so the edges of the pieces go away. The other thing that I became very interested in at Artpark was the idea of the shadow, and how the shadow also kind of dematerializes the physicality of the object. It gives you this third layer. You've got the chair, and you've got the shadow. Your shadow is interacting with the shadows of the chairs. And so we have this, it becomes more atmospheric. And that's another thing that I liked about Artpark, that things look different in the morning than they did at night. The way the sky or the weather would change certainly, but the way the sun would track and the way the shadows would change. So I started building pieces like this on the wall. This is about 6 by 6 feet. And then I started putting lights that would rotate on these things, trying to capture that idea of the movement of time over the surfaces of these things. And there you can see kind of a close-up of that piece. So these were done like, within 6 months, I think, of leaving Artpark. And then the last one I'll show you is this one, which was really kind of, when I said I was fascinated with the shadows at Artpark, I started building my shadows dimensionally, and you'll see in the close-up here that, so you have the real chair, you got the pin that goes back directly into the wall, then you have a two-dimensional cutout of the chair shadow, and then you have the real shadow of the chair. So I had one gallery owner who pointed out that if I just put another light on it, I could double its size and perhaps charge twice as much.
Of course.
But and I went on to multiple versions of that. One of the problems that you have at Artpark, or one of the benefits of Artpark, is it's up for a period of time, and then it goes away. And that's the end of it. You don't have to move it. You don't have to put it in somebody's house, or you don't have to, it's just gone. When I started doing those pieces that were pinned directly to the wall, I had galleries that would take them in, for trial error, and they would have to drill all these holes into some client's wall. And then the client would say, could we move it over 6 inches? And then you have all these holes in the wall. So is there any way that I can create that same kind of field of activity and not in the wall? And this is an example of that. So I think if there was any big takeaway for me from that experience at Artpark, it was trying to capture the vibrancy of the experience. It was trying to create an object that somehow resides in space in a way that sort of dematerializes the object, or the solidity of the object gets compromised by the way I paint them and by the way I spread them out.
Thank you. I really appreciate that course of study from the environment into a representation and an object for the wall, which becomes its own reality. I hope you'll join in as Diane talks about her work and its relationship between the nature and also the made, and how those two seem to occupy the same space. At least in my mind, they do. Diane?
Should I show and tell? Share the screen and start?
You're on.
Okay. Okay.
I got your clock going.
Oh, no. Okay. Starting now. Okay. So can you guys see this? Assume yes. Yes. Okay. So this is a sort of overview of the piece I did at Artpark in 1983. And the thing that was a surprise to me was when Tony asked me if I wanted to do this talk, I thought, oh, 1983, who could remember back that far, right? And, you know, I have this sort of trajectory as an artist of like, here's a body of work, I finish that, I go on to the next one that's even more better. The old one's no good any longer, you know? And the thing that really surprised me when I dug deep to find these old 35mm slides was that there are certain things that resonate over and over again. So I thought I would just show some slides that has a little bit of then and now comparison as a way of just sort of talking through some of the ideas. So this is an overview of the piece. The piece sort of dealt with the idea of park, and I was really interested in that because here I was doing something at a park that wasn't just a regular old park. So this portion in the middle where you see the paintings is sort of the legend to a map, and the map is a space that you walk through. And you can see on the right, there's a sort of figure in the landscape. So I made 9 different little interventions in the landscape that had to do with nature, and then made a sort of plaza in the middle that was sort of a legend to the map to get to them. So all of it for me was sort of this kind of way of talking about parkness, you know, theme parks, gardens, all that kind of thing. Those are the ideas that resonated then and still do for me. This is just a little bit of a close-up of the paintings, and those are sort of marble chips in between. So I was really interested in a lot of the things that are artifice as far as art and culture, garden and culture goes. At the time, my notebooks were sort of filled with these things that said nature versus culture and, you know, organic and geometric and this and that. But the nature culture thing really, in my, you know, my current artist period, let's say, is really not to just go nature versus culture, but to understand nature as being a cultural construct. So this is the kind of thing that I'm going to show you in the next few slides. The left is the one of the elements that was in the Artpark piece. If you were to walk around outside the legend, getting a little lost in the woods, perhaps, you'd come upon something like this. It was made with garden edging, and in the garden edging was like used to make the drawing, and in the drawing itself was white sand. So I was trying to use quote unquote natural elements, but play with the idea of these kinds of constructs of things drawing in the landscape. All of these were like really personal scale, and I chose the lower woods to do it because I wanted a kind of intimacy. I wasn't making big heroic art. This on the right is just a current sort of photograph of things I've been working on. And the thing that really struck me, the joy of finding this, was this idea of this dappled light, which I thought I was like coming across something totally new. And there it was back in 1983. So that was one of the joys of that. The spiral on the left is made with astroturf. This was another part of the Artpark interventions in the landscape. And on the right are 2 pieces called A Measure of Uncertainty. These are pretty recent, like within the last 10 years. And each of these we're talking about uncertainty in terms of what we call nature now and how uncertain our futures are with nature. A measure of uncertainty, top one is centimeters, and the measure of uncertainty at the bottom is in inches. Again, on the left is the Artpark, and that's a little arrow, but it's made of astroturf. And on the right was something that I did a few years back where I was trying to grow an entire alphabet. And the only one that really survived, it didn't wilt, was the B. So this is sort of now, you know, sort of framed for posterity as a thing. But I like this idea of experimenting. And that's a sort of trajectory that Artpark sent me on. Like, it wasn't like I knew what I was doing when I did this, but there it was. This is another part on the left, a sand drawing with garden edging again from the Artpark piece. And the piece on the right is much more recent, and it's called The End of Nature is Nature. And it really is looking at this idea of impermanence and how nature itself already has an algorithm for its own demise. So this is a number of leaves I grabbed at the end of a summer up in Phoenicia, New York. And I was so taken with how beautiful the bugs, the insects at the end of summer would eat away. So I collected a bunch of them, scanned them in, blew them up, did all this kind of stuff. But these are painted with just black gouache. And I like the idea of these are leaves from books, you know, empty pages from books that are already yellowed with age. So it's like sort of a play on this idea of leaves and leaves and impermanence and so on. And I don't know, is this my last slide? No, I think I'm going to try and keep it at 7 also. This was made right after that, and it's a book with leaves inserted in it, and the whole thing is black, and it's called Cautionary Tale. And it's a book that's going to tell the story, if any of us will listen, that in terms of nature, we're at a place of great caution, and we would do well to heed the warnings. So, okay, should I stop there?
You can.
Oh, Tony, you're muted again.
I'd love to talk some more about, I love that you mentioned these terms of impermanence, for example. I'd love to touch on that some more. It's a big subject for us, actually, impermanence.
Okay, let me stop sharing and get back. There we go.
Absolutely, versus permanent installation. So what does that idea of impermanence meant or means to you in process of creation versus building something that would be perceived as a permanent installation, for example, or work?
Yeah, it was sort of interesting. This is another one of those moments where you think you've come up with this idea of impermanence and you're going to use it in your work as if it was like brand new to you, right? But meanwhile, in 1983, I made this piece that didn't, you know, it couldn't last a season. And I had done other things back in the 70s that were sort of would disintegrate, or it would be live for a day and then it would be done. And yet I thought impermanence was this thing I invented in, you know, 2010 or something. And it's, you know, for me, the idea of impermanence in our work is it's the truth that underlies the work, you know, and it's sort of a basic Buddhist premise that all things are going to end, and we would do well to listen to that story ahead of time. So I think, you know, in my work, I use that as part of the content. But it's also, you know, that piece with those black gouache on those papers, that's not going to last. You know, it's the paper's already quite yellowed and gone. So in a way, our memories and our photographs and our oral storytelling to each other are the things that are lasting as a thread throughout our lives and our art, I guess.
That's beautifully put. The Zen notion of what's permanent, or what we can declare as permanent, is the past, and that the future is before us to be occupied. But no guarantees about that. But certainly, certainly, the ineffability of the present is a powerful thought, and it's a pleasure to see your articulation of that, for it is also shared with Dale McConaughey, the founding director of the park, who said that a work would be installed for a period, and then it would poof. Yes, the artist would take it, or the mechanisms of the state would take it. It's
and you know, I thought about this after we spoke a little last week, and I thought, you know, as soon as my piece was done, I moved to New York. I have no idea what happened to any of that. None. Did it just, you know what I mean? Did somebody take it? Did that, you know, what happened, you know? And then I think, who cares?
I think Larry Lundy has it now. That's why he was asking a moment ago, why, what after all is this made of, Diane?
Go Larry. But you know, this idea of impermanence, though, brings up this other idea of uncertainty. And this is another thing that, like, I play with a lot, like just asking questions about our ecosystem and things like that. I mean, I'm not a big eco artist, but I'm hoping to keep posing a nagging question often enough. that's sort of my goal, to do that. But uncertainty is a close cousin to impermanence. So.
And Bob, your work, while certainly articulating the history of aesthetic thought during the last century and into our own, is usually has as a material substance an awareness of living things or objects.
I would bring to this conversation of the idea that all reality is a mental construct, and that in fact this idea of the object and the solidity of our world, everything is impermanent. And it's not that the object decays and goes away, or that the projects at Artpark are removed. It's that we leave. And what we're left with is simply the memory of this thing. And it can be a grand gesture, like looking into the ravine, or seeing a Scott Burton piece up there, or walking amongst my chairs and then going home. But it can also be, a discrete object. I mean, you can go up to Michelangelo's David and you look at it and you walk away. What's the reality there? Is it the marble, or is it your memory of the marble? Because clearly when you get home, the marble's not there. But the mental construct that you've created, the experience that you've had, the visual phenomena that you've digested, becomes your reality. And it becomes, and that's what I mean by mental construct. And this idea of mental construct is fundamentally something that has intrigued me, I don't know, for the last 30 years. Like, where does the object leave off and your understanding of the object begin? Or take it to when does the experience stop and your sort of reliving it? I don't know. What do you call that, Tony? When you revisit something that's profoundly provocative or real or emotive, but it's no longer in front of you, or it's no longer concrete.
It's the soul of Romanticism. It's Wordsworth sitting at Tintern Abbey, recounting or having an opportunity to compose lines reflected in that tranquility. But it's the tranquility that's given by the past, and his observation of the river beneath Tintern Abbey and the very decay of Tintern Abbey. I think it's a romantic notion, that centers on suddenly upon the individual, where the brushstroke matters, whereas prior to Romanticism, in a more classical era, the brushstroke is hidden. We don't want to acknowledge the presence of the artist. Then we grow into the fact that we as individuals are the ones who receive the object and those who create it. Diane, this is your territory.
What? Well, I'm sorry. I don't even know where to go with that, because, I think I work with language that's visual, that sometimes I'm building on something that's from the last thing, and then whatever it was becomes something that's solid, and then not. So if I say, like a leaf or a branch is a stand-in for something, then in the next sentence, it already takes on that meaning. So I think a lot about language in that regard, and making work in that regard, of just building on things like that. Is that where you were going? Probably not anywhere near that.
No, indeed. That's nice. No, thank you. the for we and we have a question that it says that the notion that nature is a human construct is so timely. How does Diane envision a way forward for humanity now?
Oh
That's
my
heavy.
goodness. That is a heavy one. Um, yeah, well, I I think it means to anytime somebody says something about nature is to stop and pause. You know, it's like the nature of something is this, and we say it with kind of authority, but then you want to step back and really question all of the little parts you can pull out of that. Um, you know, this is human nature. It's this. Well, is it, or did we agree on that? You know, there's these sort of cultural and social constructs that we sort of all get together and agree upon, and we don't even think about it. So for me, I think about that kind of stuff in relationship to language, building up something, talking about nature. But I also think, you know, like for me, that going forward for humanity is one, to stop and question what we think nature is. And number two, to sort of listen to some of these cautionary tales that we keep hearing. You know, every day it's like, I mean, there's been so much social unrest and awfulness forever. So it's like, which thing do we really want to tackle? And the answer is, I think we want to tackle all of it. So I sort of focus on a little bit of this eco stuff and sort of being a thorn in people's sides in a nice way. You know, you can look at this art and maybe it's like, it's not hammering you over the head, but maybe there's a little something in the back of your head going, I should pay attention to this more often. So maybe if artists sort of start, you know, being a squeaky wheel a little bit would be a good thing.
Diane, thank you for that, because that is the precisely I know what Sonia is wrestling with as our leader, and she's sought to bring in wise people like you and Bob and the other artists that we're discussing ideas with, and this is a profound occasion. I know there are a number of our board colleagues with us on the chat, and Sonia, I know you've been thinking so much about this. I'm eager to hear your thoughts.
Well, we often say art park is art, nature, culture. And Diane, you've touched upon, and we often question, what did we really mean by that when we say this, when we said it? And I think you're saying it so beautifully. I also, the idea of impermanence, it's such an important also context for Art Park at its inception and now too. And I think, Tony, that this it's very interesting. I think the founders of this institution were very wise in seeing that Artwork is really confluence of many different disciplines and art forms, and also the art and the nature and the culture. In the performing arts and music and ballet and dance, theater, impermanence is a fact, is an everyday reality. Performance art as well, right? So visual art also having such a big presence at Art Park falls into that very naturally. So making all these art forms really work together in one place, you know, and permanence is that equal sort of ground for all. Here's your ballet, here's your performance art, here's your music concert, and here's visual art, all kind of put presented with that foundation, with that understanding of everything is a fleeting memory, and what our memory and our transcendence and our inspiration is the more valuable than a physical object, perhaps. That's
That's
kind of what you, yeah, made me think about.
Well, Sonia has paid such attention to these matters, for she has incorporated within the discourse the memory of the people who were here before we invaders arrived. The native people whose lessons we seek to learn, whose use of the land and protection of the land and thoughtfulness, in fact, an awareness of the divinity of the space that we are now in is a gift that Sonia has tried very hard to recognize and develop for our time, sharing and distributing those notions, so that the concept that extends way back and seeks to utilize the media, the ways of speaking of our time through electronic and digital means, so that the embrace that Artpark is developing is one which, by your words, I am very grateful for, since you've added your experience with the park, as well as your experience and wisdom in making art now. Um, what, Bob, you started us on this self-conscious way of appreciating and understanding what we're up to. Would you continue it?
Mm. Well, I think that, there's a fine dance between the tactility of the park. Let's see, how would I add this? There's the one thing that I fear is that the digital world takes us, has the ability to take us, expose us to more things, but at the same time take us further away from the tactile world in which we find ourselves. And what I admire about Diane's work is that it seems as though it's very directly trying to keep that connection between us and the natural world a viable and understandable element within our consciousness. And I think that that's, if I'm hearing her right and seeing her work correctly, I think that that's a big part of it. And so how can we get Artpark to offer more of those kinds of experiences and how can art do this? Bring people to the point where they become self-aware, hyper-aware of themselves within an environment or within an experience even.
The provocation of art, whether it is a unique object or that is one that has not been perceived before, or an event that is indeed unique, or a concept that is unique. Thus, the work of, say, Sherry Levine, who photographing a famous photograph and declaring it her own, is certainly plays into what you were saying, and is extended by Biff Henrich, who has given us a note that reads that the interesting thing about Artpark Visual Arts was that each year we would get to experience different things in the same spot where another thing happened the previous year. The impermanence was what made it vital and visceral. I think that's a wonderful extension to what we've been talking about. Thanks, Biff. For Biff was involved in those early Hall Walls SEPA days and enjoyed the gifts that the artists from Artpark presented to us all. Diane, your turn.
I was just wondering. Thank you, Biff, for that. I think I have to credit Biff for helping me cut out that spiral.
And how big was it? Back to Larry. You want to know how big?
Back to Larry. The squares in the middle were probably 3 or 4 feet each. So the 9 of them together would be 10 feet, 12 feet. It's like human scale. I wasn't making big, heroic art. I was trying to make intimate things, human scale. And actually the woods helped me do that because the whole thing was like a little bit of a dark, intimate space already. I like that.
There's a question actually by Sasha Chevadze, if I'm saying this right. Can Diane talk more about her use of letters and words made out of twigs? Were they influenced by Artpark?
Sasha knows my work very well, and we shared studio space at one time, so we know each other very well. Hey, Sasha. I don't have any pictures of these letters, but you know, this is another one of those things where you think you're doing something brand new, you know, and then all of a sudden you look and you're like, oh, I was out in the woods working on things that was a visual language, you know, and in fact, Sasha and I have said this to each other, that we're sort of hardwired to make the same things over and over again. And you come at it at different times in your life, having brought other experiences with you, or read another book, or saw another lecture, and you come back to the same thing, but this time it's a little bit different. And so I feel like my trajectory as an artist isn't like this. It's not a linear progression, but it's more like an iterative spiral where you sort of circle around again. Let me check this out this time. So I think Artpark did really influence those twig letters much later, but I wouldn't have said that. So I'm thanking Sonia and Tony for inviting me to do this, because it's been actually good for me as an artist to like look back a little bit, and it's been interesting like that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. Last word, Bob?
Well, I'm intrigued with anybody that uses words or even alludes to words within their work, Diane. And I think that you know, we respond viscerally to things, but we think with words. And I've often wondered, you know, what is it like, you know, as an infant before you know language? How do you digest the world around you if you don't have words to describe your thoughts? What are those thoughts? Do thoughts even exist before words? What's pre-language experience of your environment and all about anyway? So when I see your work and I hear you use this, you know, or even if they're not legible words, they read like words, and they bring us into the conversation of your objects in multiple levels. Like, we respond to the visual that you present, and then there's something else that's going on with the sticks. There's it's like
I might use that as a quote.
Diane Bertolo, something's going on.
Something's going on with those sticks.
You know, I mean, you know, we as a species are inclined to create things, and we're inclined to try and figure things out or try to understand things. You know, we look everything from looking at the sky and looking at the pattern of a cloud and saying, oh, it looks like a buffalo. It looks, you know, it's like we're kind of, what does it taste like? Well, it tastes like chicken. You know, I mean, we're constantly trying to reference things back and forth. And so when I see your work and I see those sticks, to me, it's a language, and I try to make sense out of it in a very kind of literal narrative way. And it brings me in because it could mean anything. It's approachable on a lot of layers. So I like that. I like those things juxtaposed to one another.
Oh,
That's the way we learn.
Thank you.
We learn through simile. This is like that, and it's a part of the fun of homonyms, isn't it? Where the same word spoken mean two different things, spelled two different ways, but the same word spoken. Hare, a rabbit, hare, which I lack, would be a good example of a homonym. And the play of that is that one thing in that sense is dissimilar. So I think we learn a lot through what things are like or what they're not like. We go to a foreign country and we want to figure out how to understand what someone's telling us and what our differences are, one culture to another. And that's the way we explore, I think. That's a nice point, Bob. Thank you. Sonia, last word?
Well, I just wanted to thank our guests and our audience tonight. Another fascinating conversation, and it's such a gift to be part of Artpark and what Artpark is and what it will be and what it can be, and you're all part of that process. And thank you so much for joining us. Next one will be with Owen Morell, the creator of Omega. Those of you who live in Lewiston or been to Artpark, I'm sure remember and know this installation. Again, visit us on our website, artpark.net. Your donations, your letters, your notes to us, your thoughts are very, very important in this process. And Diane, Robert, thank you so much. Your work, your inspiration, your thoughts are very much and will be used in all of our thinking as we develop.
Excellent. Thank you. It's been
Hey.
really fun pressing some of the old buttons.
Well, guess what? There's a PS that came in at the last minute, which is a provocative question. Could we end quickly with that? And it is, if you're to do if it says, quote, if you all, were to do a current piece now, what might it be?
Perfect.
Do you mean at Artpark or just working currently?
The questioner doesn't say. It precedes with what might some of the current experiential effects attempt to accomplish, which I think ties into the second part. If you're to do a current piece, what would it be? And you're free to answer it any way you want. No help here.
Okay.
I guess I would have to consider a way in which I could address the transient nature of time.
Mm.
I mean, when I was called and asked if I would participate in this, and I thought, my God, it's 40 years ago or thereabouts. And of course, like Diane, I mean, you were forced to sort of think about, well, where was I then at 29 years old or 30 years old, and where am I now all these years later? And I think that Artpark is, the whole thing about the falls used to be right there, geologic time, and now they're up in Niagara. So this idea of time passage, transient nature of time, I'd have to give that some thought, but I think that would be the important part to consider.
Diane?
Well, I don't even know. I mean, I don't know. Let's see. I mean, the things that I'm working on now it's like one of the first pictures I showed you there was a piece of bark, a piece of wood, a circle, and shadows. For me, I'm just sort of reestablishing a language of those kinds of things. So I've been making images right now that have the shadows in them. And then every once in a while I have an image and I don't have a shadow and it feels so empty. And I thought a lot about how the shadows have really the shadows of trees, not just a shadow, that nature is sort of imposing its shadowy self on us. And I love that, it's always reminding us that it's there. So I have images where I don't have the shadow and I find myself photoshopping some shadows from trees into other things, which is sort of a bit of fakery, which I like. But I think what I might like to do is something more installational where there's actually plants and lights sort of in it, just to sort of feel what that experience is like, to try and make it not just a photo of a thing, but actually experience the thing itself. So that would be a really fun residency to do someplace, and probably inside, not outside, because it would be this idea of bringing the effects of nature into a cultural space.
Well, when you're next in
I just
Buffalo,
made that up.
that was wonderful because I have a response. There's when you're back in Buffalo, we'll go to the Birchfield
Okay.
Penny Art Center, where Charles Birchfield did a study of the shadows that leaves make upon the ground, and he represents each species of tree. Here's the birch.
Oh my gosh.
Here's a sumac. Here's an elm, and does little squares on a piece of paper as if it were a page out of a scientific lesson book of the shapes of the shadows of tree leaves.
My goodness.
There you have.
Okay, there's
So,
a field trip for Tony and I later on.
Good.
So Diane,
I love that.
if you go back to Artpark and do this piece, and you're looking for shadows, there may still be some chair shadows laying about. You're welcome to use as many of them as you'd like.
Yes.
Okay.
Good, Bob. And then we'll enter time. We'll factor time into it in the transition of the
Somehow.
It's like
what
a
happens
gift of
to
shadows. I like
yes, the diurnal nature of the shadow.
that.
What happens to the shadow when you leave?
Yes.
Stays in the shadow.
Well,
What
I'm going to
happens
shut.
when the shadow stays in the shadow? Okay.
Yes. So we'll shut the lights, huh?
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thank you, friends, for showing up.
Yeah, wonderful. Hi, Larry. Thank you.
Thanks.